Hey, folks, you do not want to miss this. I am with the awesome Matthew McCarron. Matthew is a comedian that runs a really cool YouTube channel and podcast called Am I Making Sense? Matthew, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mudit. Thank you so much for having me. Like I just said, we just did a podcast on Am I Making Sense? And I'm really happy. You've got a strong following, my friend. And I'm happy with how the podcast is doing so far. So I'm just excited to get onto your podcast. I really enjoy the content that you've been putting out on your channel, and just happy to be here, talk about comedy, talk about what's going on, podcasting. It's like this whole thing. Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And for viewers, Matthew and I met online through the Zoom comedy scene. We hopped on several mics that we happened to be on. And Matthew also runs this really poppin' YouTube channel called Am I Making Sense? So share a couple things with us, Matthew. Tell us the origins of your comedy journey, and then the origins of Am I Making Sense?
Yes. So I'll kick it off with stand-up comedy, because again, like you said, that's kind of how we know each other. The Zoom stuff that's happening, I think comics were mixing and mingling in ways that we didn't before, and that's really good. So I'll kind of kick off with the comedy thing. I've only been doing comedy for about 2.5 years now.
Gotcha.
Now, I've always loved comedy. I both stand-up comedy and just funny movies, right? Yeah. I grew up in the 80s, so there was no shortage of just silly, funny stuff to get in the theater and also on television. And so I've always been a fan of, anyone out there trying to make people laugh.
Yeah.
But it was never anything that I thought was something that I would want to try or that I would get into. Of course, you always have when you're young, you have that group of friends who you're always just shooting the shit and like goofing around and trying to make each other laugh. And there was no shortage of that in my life, right? Like my friends, my family, we have a very what I would categorize as kind of working class, almost gallows humor. Like we laugh at dark stuff.
Gotcha.
Ironically, I just got into it today with my wife because both of my daughters, they're kind of getting this. We'll just call it working class humor, where they're just laughing at whatever poop jokes or fart jokes and it's dark stuff. And my wife goes, you guys get that from your dad? And I go, yeah, I'm kind of proud of that. That's, just stupid things make me laugh. And sometimes off color things make me laugh. So anyway, to cut to the chase, I do some traveling both for work and family. A few years back, I was in New York, and I don't know, whenever I'm in New York, I try to at least take in one comedy show and, take in the sights, whatever you want to call it. And, but I decided I want to go to multiple, comedy clubs, and something happened there, man. I don't know if it was the late nights. I don't know if it was something in the water, but I remember flying home from that trip, and I was just on my mobile device and, oh, would this be funny? And I just started to try and write jokes. And then I told my wife when I got back, I said, I have to find an open mic. And, I'm not a big social media user at the time. I mean, I have a social media account. I didn't even think to look on Facebook for open mics. So I was literally doing Google searches. I'm here in San Jose area, San Jose, California area. And I was just searching around for open mics, and I found an open mic, and I wrote down a bunch of stuff that I thought it was funny to me. I just wrote it down. I went to the open mic. I was literally the last guy to go up. And Mudit, let me tell you, I showed up in just a standard work shirt, right? Like I was wearing jeans and a button down, like collared work shirt.
Yeah.
So this is kind of, for me, trial by fire story. Almost every comic roasted me. They were just shitting on me.
Boy.
It was like next. And I would move around in the bar to try and find like different places, because I don't think anyone knew I was going up, but I think I just looked conspicuous. I don't know what it was about me. I guess just a goofy looking white guy in a button down shirt. And just everyone was taking shots at me, and I was laughing it all off. And like, it got to the point where some other comics got up, and I look back in retrospect, and I realize now that I'm doing stand-up comedy so much now, I realized that if you don't have a big audience, you kind of latch on to things to make something happen. And I realize now that many of the comics who were shitting on me, they were just trying to make something happen in an otherwise dead room, because I was literally probably the only guy paying attention to what was being said. And so anyway, there was other comics who were like, hey, leave this guy alone. He's the only one listening to us. So like some of the comics were like coming to my aid or something. I don't know.
Right.
Anyway, I was the last guy to go up, and I went up, and by that time, some of the comics had kind of like just relaxed, and they were just drinking and kind of watching. And I don't know whether I did good or not. My adrenaline was kicking.
Right.
So who knows? But I can tell you this, that one of the guys, he's still my friend to this day. His name's Kyle Hovland. He's a Bay Area stand-up comic. I don't think I see him on Zoom meetings, but not that much. Anyway, he's a very lovable, fun comedian. And I remember he had been drinking too much that night. And when I got off the stage, he was like, you did good. And he gave me like this big bear hug.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a cool moment. And I got off stage, and I had assumed, well, maybe this will just be, I did it and then check the box and I'll never do it again. But I kept coming back. There was a break where I went a couple times, and then I was just like, I can't be out this late all the time. But then what happened is I took some time off, and here in the South Bay, there were a lot more rooms opening up. And so when I jumped back in, I didn't have to be out as late. And then I don't know, for probably up and until the pandemic, I was going to open mics anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week, or 3 to 5 open mics a week.
Okay.
And not Monday through Friday, but like I would try and get 2 or 3 on a Tuesday or something, So yeah, it just stuck. And that's kind of how things got started off. And then, and then we moved into the Zoom era, and here we are.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally relate with the adrenaline just rushing, and here in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. I think what you're describing with the roasting, I get a lot of that in the Baltimore scene in particular. So yeah. I hear you. And what about the origins of Am I Making Sense, like the YouTube content?
So, okay, this is going to be interesting, because I think me and you, we share a little bit in how we bumped into things, because I've been into listening to podcasts probably since 2009. But, I first started listening to podcasts. I'm in a technical field. And so I was listening to podcasts about like coding, and listening to podcasts about Linux, and just like cybersecurity, like highly, highly technical, boring podcasts. Right. Okay. But I was getting so much value, because like on the car ride to work, or I used to ride my bike to work too, I'd be listening to podcasts, and I would be learning. And I know that you have listened to pharmaceutical podcasts, which is a technical field also, right? So I never, even for probably like 3 years of listening to podcasts, I never thought of it as entertainment. Like I had talked about when we were talking about comedy, like I love being entertained. Obviously, I love laughing. I love funny movies. I love stand-up comedy. But I never thought of podcasts as entertaining. And then I think it was probably either a Mark Maron or a Joe Rogan podcast, or one of these that trend in the top 10.
Okay.
And I started branching out, listening to like the NPR stuff. But then I listened to some of the comic podcasts. Bill Burr, he was another one that I listen to, and I go, oh shit, this is not just a way of getting information. Podcasting can also be very entertaining.
Yeah.
And so this was probably around 2013, 2014 that I'm starting to have these revelations, these thoughts. Mm-hmm. And I said, I really want to do a podcast. Without going into all the details, I've tried to start probably 6 or 7 different podcasts on different things. And nothing really stuck. I've had podcasts that were very rewarding for me in the people I did them with. And I've had some that I think are still on the back burner that I started, but I couldn't get. So what I'm finding, and you probably find the same thing, is anything that you do on your own, you could probably move a little bit faster and make things happen. But anytime you're starting to get people to have to get together and participate, it's very difficult. Mm-hmm. And so when I started comedy, I probably had 2 or 3 other podcasts I was working on. And
Okay.
so I started stand-up comedy. And then of course the light bulb went off. I go, wait, why am I not talking to the people I'm doing stand-up comedy with? And so I was probably only doing stand-up comedy maybe 9 months. I was under a year. And then I just said, you know what? I'm going to start interviewing the people I do stand-up comedy with. And so it started very humbly. I just, asked the people that I was closest with, hey, can you be on my podcast? And then got up the RSS feed, I didn't even start doing YouTube until maybe like a year ago, maybe longer, maybe a year and a half. But anyway, and so I started getting traction, and like more comics would want to join it, and we're saying, yeah, I want to be on your podcast. And so then it just kind of turned into this thing that's pretty much sustained itself.
Yeah.
For about a year and a half now, it's sustained itself. So this is, Am I Making Sense is the only successful podcast, but this is what I can say. I'm ride or die podcasting, like stand-up comedy. I love it. And I definitely, I'm going to keep doing it. But like podcasting, I just feel for some reason, like it's almost to the point where it's a compulsion. I love booking people. I love thinking about who I want to have on the show. And then when I get people on the show, I just love having that conversation.
Gotcha. Yeah, I definitely relate to the bit you talked about, the point on, I think it was like when other people are involved, then you've got to schedule things for, coordinating logistics. And I think that's one of the things that drew me both to stand up. And it's also the reason why my podcast, furthermore, here on YouTube is so open-ended. Like I interview comics, artists, musicians, dancers, and even if folks want to talk about their day jobs, like professionals, if you will.
Yeah.
And because like when it started, I think I talked about this on your podcast, where when I started the podcast, I had some inklings of like fleshing out like really specific niche things of like pharmaceutical policy, and then comedy as well, and then certain policy proposals of political candidates at the time. But then I think, and because I was coordinating with a comedian at the time that had similar views as me, but then when the ball got rolling, I felt like when it came to booking people for the podcast, keeping it open and then sort of independently running it was what got it sustainable. So
100%. And the great thing is it's good to have all of those go-to fields to add to your podcast. But at the end of the day, hitting up a stand-up comic and say, hey, I want to talk with you for whatever the time may be, 30 minutes to an hour on my podcast. Very rarely is a comic going to say no. And when I say comic, I mean, obviously you can't just hit up Bill Burr. He's not going to say yes. But I mean, people that you're doing it with at that level, I mean, it's very rare to have someone say no. And so what that means is scheduling all of a sudden opens itself up. Like you only have yourself to worry about. Okay, this is my calendar. What does your calendar look like? And then boom, you just schedule people and you get the conversation going, and who cares what you talk about, right? Like it's fine. Talk about whatever. You could talk about politics. I mean, Am I Making Sense? I always like to hear about comedy and stuff like that, but I try to talk about other subjects too, because gone are the days of the one-dimensional entertainer. Like as far as I can see, that's never going to happen before, where you have whatever the Rodney Dangerfield, where we don't really know who he is or what he's about. We know he can tell jokes, he can slay with it, or like Steve Martin, those days where you get this act, you get an act. That's the word I'm looking for. Now I think people are genuinely, they're just interested in who this person is. Like, I want to know, what is it that makes Mudit click? And and that means that my horizon will be expanded, and I might learn a little something about pharmaceutical game. I might learn something a little about political games. Who knows, but I like you and I want to listen to it. So yeah, I think I would say that's a good move, keeping things open and showing people for what they are, which is not just this one thing that they bring to the table. We're all very multifaceted, and the podcast allows us time to kind of show all these different dimensions that we have. Absolutely.
And could you expand on some of the content you like to talk about during your stand-up sets? You mentioned like the working class humor and the dark humor. Yeah.
So I set out when I first started to do it. It's kind of a dorky scientific way of looking at it, but I set out with a hypothesis, not a hypothesis, a work question of number one, can I be funny in front of strangers, at the drop of the hat? That's what stand-ups do, right? We go into a room and God willing, we're the funniest person there for our 5, 10, 15, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, we want to be the funniest ones. So the first working question I set out with was, can I be funny? And then the second working question was, can I make anything funny?
Mm.
And I think this is kind of a tip to the hat of like, I've laughed about a lot of things in my life that have been helpful for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe some people would have said, you shouldn't have laughed at that. And so I think it's very timely for a comedian to ask himself, can I make anything funny?
Mm.
And I would say 15 to 20 years ago, stand-up comics would have said nothing is taboo, nothing is off limits. And they would have made jokes about anything. I think now this concept, I had never heard this concept until I started doing comedy about punching up or punching down. I don't think comics would have ever thought to themselves, oh, that was punching down, I shouldn't say that. But now comics do. Maybe it's for the better, maybe it's not. But anyway, to answer your question more directly is, I pull a lot from my life because obviously I'm a dad, I'm a husband. I do pull from the news. I think I'm not a political guy in the sense that I probably wouldn't be able to hold a very thoughtful and intelligent conversation with you if we were to discuss politics, but I read the headlines, right? And I think once you read the headlines, you start formulating an opinion. And then from there, once you have that opinion, like, how can I make this funny? Can I twist this around to say, this is a horrible subject, but you know what, let's touch on it and let's see if we can laugh a little. So I think if I'm answering your question honestly, I think it's too early to tell what I like to write about the most. And it's kind of a cop out. I'll say I like writing about just about anything that happens to me. I'm looking at my set list from today, and I was kind of riffing on this word sedition today in one of my sets because I'm 45 years old, and I went 45 years and I never heard, read, or said the word sedition. Never. And now since Wednesday, January 6th, I've witnessed this word 188,000 times in 5 days, right? And most of those are me trying to say it to sound intelligent to people around me, right? So like, this is just a word, and I'm like riffing on it, like sedition. How come I never heard this word before? And how come I feel compulsed to say the word sedition? Where podcasting is like, oh, I got to work in sedition now. This podcast.
Yeah.
Like, this is something I think about these things, obviously, I had an act. I had about 4 to 5 minutes that I felt really good about prior to COVID. And most of the jokes in that were about what I do, my family, kind of my looks. I open up with shots on my looks, and then also podcasting and YouTube. And it was all kind of making fun of this absurdity of what am I trying to do? I'm an old man. Why am I doing this stuff? Right. But that all went out the window. And then once we started doing Zoom comedy, I was kind of riffing on current events, and I was riffing on COVID, and I was riffing on here in California, we had devastating fires, which I was like, opportunity. Can you find a joke in here somewhere? And so I was kind of riffing on that. Now, obviously, these last 3 months has been like, oh my gosh, I'm not a political humorist at all, but how can I not say anything? So I've been saying things here and there about what's going on. So I think for now, I'm just a generalist. I don't think I can say I'm a guy with a lot of jokes about being a dad, or I'm a guy with a lot of jokes about being married. I am all those things, but I'm just, and then plus we haven't got into it, but I think the Zoom has changed us all. I don't know how I'm doing ever in a Zoom room. And so I don't know which direction to go with some of these. Whereas like, I've had aha moments on stage where I say something, and then as I'm walking off stage, there's like this aha, like, oh, the way you put those two words together works really well. So
Right.
let's run with that. And maybe let's call it a part of your act. And then
Mhm.
it goes to the A team with the good jokes. Right.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever had that in Zoom. So to be honest, I'm just grasping at straws, trying to write anything down and say anything and
Yeah.
see what happens.
Yeah, I didn't think of the phenomenon where when Zoom comedy took off that I had a similar kind of experience where current events started to really bubble into my Zoom comedy sets in particular. And maybe it's because we're literally in front of a computer, like,
Mhm.
and the way it's set up is that you can, in a matter of seconds, without the audience even knowing, like pull up a current event, and then that's that's not the case in the traditional cadence of stand up. So, yeah.
It's changed so much because of this. And I think we talked about on my podcast, the way my process is different.
Mhm.
Before I really prided myself on memorizing not necessarily memorizing, but I knew what jokes I wanted to deliver and when I wanted to deliver them. And it was all memorization prior to me going up.
Right.
I don't memorize much anymore. I got a Google document right here and I'll talk to the camera, deliver something, look down, look up. And so it's not good for my memory, for my keeping my memory sharp, but it's good, like you said, because I have so much stuff written down that I can make little adjustments here and there and then
Right.
read and go to this. So it's definitely changed things. And I don't know, man, I don't know what it's gonna feel like going back to it.
Right. And I think that like for me, there's a side to when I have things put into bullet points, then the cadence of me speaking to those is more natural and a bit more off the cuff, which I think is a big part of a lot of stand up from my observation. So I think there's a there's something there. Um, and it's something I want to touch on. I think the last big thing is so I'm viewers. I got a day job. I'm starting soon. So how do you stay on top of everything? How do you balance comedy with work and life and regular exercise and family, all that stuff?
With so I guess we'll break it into two different eras also. We'll say pre-COVID and post-COVID.
Okay,
Post-COVID, I found it very easy to stay on top of everything.
gotcha.
When you look at it like, okay, I used to spend an hour 30, an hour 40 a day just getting to and fro work.
Mm,
So you think about that, I get an hour and a 45 times 5 since March.
wow.
Um, and so that's areas where I can do things like I do my exercises, I walk the dog, I do all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff that would have normally been spent sitting in a car. So that's great. Also, my kids' schedules have gotten lightened up a lot in that they don't play soccer games. There's no they're not even in school. I'm in California. It's like they're here all day,
Right.
which means I do have to work with them on their schoolwork, but I'm not driving them to school. I'm not there's nothing. There's no function. So it's been it's been easy for me with Zoom.
Okay.
Now, what I will say is when I used to do this in um, it's funny. I almost said when I used to do this in the physical world.
There it is.
That's when I used to do it. I don't even, what is it insulting to say in real life? Whatever we were doing prior to
Yeah.
Zoom comedy, whatever we were doing there, it was too much. I think, if I'm being honest with myself, Mudit, I think it was a little too much because,
Mm,
I would maybe even only 3 nights a week I would go out, but there were a lot of times that I wasn't home until 1:30,
yeah.
and then I was usually in the office by 6:30, 7 a.m.
Wow.
And then when you get home, it's a matter of you got the parent things you got to do. You got to drive your kids around, hang out with the family. So I think back then, it, the most honest answer I could give you is I was doing too much,
Okay.
and probably there would have been a breaking point at some point. But then we went into lockdown, and now, so I've changed gears now, and I think I've realized, that the real big bonus for me with the pandemic is um my ego has kind of settled down, and I've realized, like, oh no, the best feeling that I can have is just being around my family.
Mm.
And so when we go back to it, I'll probably only be doing open mics once or twice a week, and I'll still podcast once or twice a week.
Mhm.
But when we do go back to more traditional day management,
Yeah.
what I would say is you really have to be shrewd with all your time. You
Mm.
know, like for instance, writing. Let's just talk about writing a set. You know, I would get 10 minutes, 15 minutes here and there throughout the day. And if I pissed that time away by watching a YouTube or looking through my social media,
Yeah.
if I wasted it, then I didn't get my writing done.
Right.
Right. So the way I wrote comedy was just very efficient. Like, okay, I'm in between meetings for the next 20 minutes. Sit down and start thinking like, what jokes do you know will work? Okay, let's put some of those in, and you need some new material. So think about what you want to say, or maybe expand on something. So I wasn't writing for probably any more than an hour a day for my comedy, but I was, what was I going to say? But I would break it into 15-minute chunks.
I see.
And then with podcasting, here's another hack that I would use. When it came to podcasting, I was doing it all in person. There was a time I was in a studio that didn't work out well. There was a time I was in my garage that worked out kind of okay, but it's not insulated in here. But I would literally podcast. Me and other comedians would just drive to open mics together. And I have at least a dozen, maybe more podcasts of me just hooking up mics in my car.
Wow.
And we would just drive somewhere, and then that would be the podcast. So I would say, cool, I got a podcast done, but I used the commute time as my podcast. Now, is the quality good? No, it's shit quality. But the point was the conversation was had. If people want to listen to it, they can listen to it. So I just tried to get really creative with how I did podcasting. And I almost always tried to stack my comedy time and my podcast time where like, oh, okay, maybe we will podcast in my garage, but let's podcast in my garage and then go hit up an open mic afterwards.
Got it.
So I just tried to really pack things in as tight as possible with
Gotcha.
all the different things I did.
Definitely. That is super helpful, like very useful stuff with the time management. And yeah, so viewers, please check out Am I Making Sense on YouTube. Search that in YouTube. You'll find Matthew McCarron's content, and you can also find him on Instagram, which is at Matthew McCarron Comedy. Thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is a blast. And yes, listeners, I do realize that my Instagram tag is probably the worst name, Matthew McCarron Comedy. I literally had a joke where I would end a set and I would start spelling it out, and it would just go on. And on. Who is this guy thinking he put that in the Instagram tag? But anyway, thank you very much, Mudit. This is fun. You're totally awesome, dude.
Thank you. Likewise. And I think, that makes you stick out. The long name, you're unique. That's good.
Yeah, stick out. That's right.